I found a very interesting story because I know so many Chicagoans are burdened with insanely increasing property tax hikes. And we've talked about it here on the show before. We're disappointed in progressive Cook County Assessor Fritz Kaegi, who ran on a promise of reform and hopefully bringing people's property taxes down. And suddenly people are getting crazy property tax bills. And we're like, what the fuck? I'm going to say it. What's going on, Fritz? What's the deal? So he was invited to provide an essay on what he sees as the reason behind our rising property taxes. And I got to say, it actually makes a lot of sense. It's a bit lengthy, but I do want to share it with you all because he makes some very, very strong points in regards to the digital economy. What is the digital economy? The digital economy is Amazon. It's everybody buying things online. It's the disappearance of brick and mortar stores from our neighborhoods because we are relying on a digital economy. When you eliminate the brick and mortar stores from the neighborhoods, that's a source of tax revenue that is no longer there. Therefore, the burden on paying for our services is more often falling on residents as opposed to businesses in the neighborhoods. And there's also some good points to be made in this article about the segregated nature of our city. So let me just jump into the article, the essay that was penned by our Cook County Assessor Fritz Kaegi. And it's going to go a little bit. I'm going to be reading a lot, but bear with me. I think that it makes some very good points as we discuss or try to figure out solutions for the burdensome property taxes that everyone in Chicago seems to be suffering now. So about this essay, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs is an independent, nonpartisan organization that provides insights on critical global issues, advances policy solutions, and fosters dialogue about what is happening in the world and why it matters to people in Chicago, the United States, and around the globe. The council asked Assessor Fritz Kaegi to submit an essay to its recent collection, Reclaiming the Right to the City, wherein a diverse set of experts examine the question of rights in and to the city in a wide and exciting array of geographies and contexts. They highlight powerful inequities and contradictions in city life and also offer policy solutions. So here we go. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm getting tired of bitching about these things. And when I read this essay, I thought, well, he does offer some solutions. Now we have to see how to get them into action. So here's what Cook County Assessor Kaegi has to share with us. Cities around the world are evolving as digital technology and the global pandemic alter the urban economy. But how can the funding sources for city services like education evolve with them? Without a 21st century system of property taxation that supports equitable funding for all, cities are likely to generate pockets of de facto segregation along racial and economic lines. Giving everyone the right to the city for all requires revenue model innovations that match the leaps and bounds we're making in technology. With the global economy reaching into even the smallest of towns, we must look beyond the traditional borders of local governance to lift all as cities undergo economic transformations. The funding tools available to cities are even more ill-suited to fair taxation. In the United States, the fiscal mechanisms for schools, municipalities, and other units of local government lean heavily on taxing property, more than half of local revenues if state and federal aid is excluded. Illinois has the third highest number of school systems in the nation, behind California and Texas, and the majority of public education funding in the state, 63%, is derived from property taxes. Funding for education relies on real property, yet this spatially rooted tax base is under threat as economic activity becomes increasingly digital, with no fixed location and much less dependence on brick and mortar assets. Now, remember, when everybody is relying on, digital assets, ordering from Amazon, and there's no store that you're going into and paying a sales tax, or no business that's paying some taxes in your neighborhood, Amazon doesn't pay taxes. Boom. How are things in the neighborhood covered then? From our property taxes. In 1990, information technology companies and direct retailers accounted for only 4% of the market capitalization of the S&P 500 index, a widely accepted proxy for the U.S. stock market. In 2021, these companies account for 32% of the index. Moreover, the 5 largest companies in this sector and you all know who they are. Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, Google, Amazon, and Facebook now account for 20% of the earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation of all the companies in the index, according to data from Bloomberg. This is why we're screaming tax the rich. The global pandemic greatly accelerated this trend as office workers moved to Zoom, retail sales shifted to Amazon and Grubhub, and families decamped to more remote locations. Why brick and mortar taxation hurts equity. Tethering the funding of local services to brick and mortar assets is troubling from the point of view of equity and the question of who has the right to the city, because the digital portion of the economy is not similarly taxed. And I think we're all aware of that this has been an ongoing conversation. Without additional revenue sources, communities will have to sustain themselves on the taxes derived from the value of local property. Essential services decline, new potential residents look elsewhere, job opportunities fall off, and an already declining tax base suffers further. Freedom of movement will only be possible for those who already enjoy economic prosperity. Make no mistake, small businesses and brick and mortar spaces are still at the heart of community vitality and sustainability and will continue to be important. They give communities and cities their distinctive character and special sense of place, not to mention employment. But why should capital invested in these city-sustaining activities be required to cover so much of the cost of local services while the growing share of the digital economy gets a pass? Good question. Using property taxes to fund services such as education can also reinforce segregation and unequal outcomes. And isn't this what we're seeing? Because tax revenues vary from one district to another based on the size and prosperity of the local real estate tax base. For example, communities in Illinois with more affluent property owners and an abundance of business can afford to spend more per pupil on education, while communities with fewer resources struggle. This system not only reinforces segregation and existing disparities, but also further widens the wealth gap. Illinois ranks last in the United States for state sharing of revenues with school districts. As a result, property taxes are generally high, largely to fill this gap. The lower value of real estate in a community, the higher the effective rate to provide a comparable level of school services. This results in great disparities. Pretty simple, actually, when you break it down and think about it that way. Who is hurt the most by high property tax rates? In his jurisdiction of Cook County, for example, the communities with the 20 highest property tax rates exceed the other 110 communities by 3 to 5 times, even though the level of education funding per pupil is comparable or less. And he does have a chart that he added. Let me bring this up to get to this portion of the article. Most of these communities are majority Black, while most of the other Cook County communities are majority white. For communities at the top end of rates, taxes exceed 5% of home values versus the effective average in Chicago of under 2%. In the assessment universe, this is called regressivity, when property owners with more modest homes and businesses have to pay more of their share than more affluent property owners. And this is what we're seeing in this crazy property tax hike that everybody is suddenly wondering about as they're getting their assessments these past couple months. First, for $1 invested in housing, higher property tax rates can overwhelm the beneficial effect of compound growth in asset prices, much like a ruinously high management fee on a mutual fund versus the low fee of an index fund. This puts a lid on prices and can in fact push them down, depressing intergenerational wealth. Second, less wealthy individuals and minorities tend to have more of their wealth invested in homes that are burdened by high taxes, while wealthier households have more of their savings invested in financial and business assets that are not subject to similarly heavily annual taxation. Helps relieve the pain I feel in my head when I read that. According to the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank, in 2021, the bottom half of U.S. households by wealth had about 50% of their wealth invested in real estate, while the top 10% of households by wealth had just 19% of their wealth in real estate. Black and Latino Americans also had more of their wealth invested in their homes than other racial groups. In the United States, home ownership has been one of the fastest ways to build wealth because families can leverage it through mortgage debt. This is even more important for Black families who possess about 1/10 of the wealth of whites and who typically hold the majority of their wealth in their homes. Property taxes can eat away at the appreciation of these assets, which slows wealth creation or worse, subtracts from it, leaving these families further behind and potentially underwater on their mortgages. By mapping this web of taxation policies and practices onto physical space, one can see how these structural rate disparities exacerbate inequality. They serve as a hidden roadmap guiding investment, property values, and resources for education and other services across neighborhoods. And by the way, everybody, if you want, this is linked in the show notes below. So if you also want to look at this article and follow along or just, reference it for later, we do have the link to Cook County Assessor Kaegi's essay in the notes below. Capital that can be invested in real estate converges towards areas with the lowest real estate taxes, unless the capital can earn a compensating additional return in areas where effective property tax rates are higher. The main mechanism for providing the compensating additional return is lower real estate prices, which further shrink the local tax base. So let me skip ahead though, because we know what the problem is. Let's get to where is it? Solutions. Okay. Local solutions for a more equitable tax system. While my office does not have jurisdiction over municipal tax levies, I can say that increased federal and state support for school funding will help reduce the tax burden paid by homeowners and local mom and pop businesses, while also reducing racial disparities in schools and community services. As noted, Illinois provides the lowest level of funding for education of any state in the nation. An increase in federal school funding through Title I of the 1965 Elementary and Secondary Education Act is the most direct way to decrease property taxes and geographic inequality while investing in education. If we doubled the current $300 million in Title I funding for Chicago's public schools and passed on the savings to ratepayers, the property tax levy for schools would be reduced by 10%. And this is Title I at the U.S. Department of Education. That's linked in the show notes also if you want to take a look at it. Going back to the article or the essay. We must reimagine and reprioritize how we fund education by increasing federal support. This is not a new or radical concept. It was so important to civil rights and labor leader A. Philip Randolph that he included it in his speech at the March on Washington in 1963, saying we want integrated public schools, but that means we also want federal aid to education, all forms of education. If we agree that everyone has a right to the city and that dismantling inequality is imperative, we must continue to push for local school funding that is not rooted in local land values, especially as more business moves online, so that everyone has access to quality housing and vibrant communities without disproportionately burdening the property owners we seek to help.